Last week, Turo mass banned over 1,500 cars on the Turo platform, affecting hundreds, if not thousands, of hosts. These hosts were notified of being banned by an email sent by Turo, letting them know that at least one car was going to be permanently unlisted by Turo for maintenance concerns. But due to the vague nature of this email, this has left many Turo hosts, including myself, uncertain about what is going to happen next and what type of standards hosts have to adhere to in order to avoid this situation with their own cars. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down this situation. Now, one question that I've been asked by quite a few people is if my Turo cars were affected by this unlisting, and the answer is no. Now, and by we I mean the Turo host community, we don't really know a lot about this banning and mass unlisting of cars. Turo is certainly framing this as a maintenance thing. Cars that are not well maintained are going to get permanently unlisted and banned. And before I dive into my exact thoughts, I do want to note that I do want to tread lightly on this topic for two key reasons. Number one is that I don't want to spread any misinformation. And number two, I don't have access to any special information that you guys watching this video don't have access to either. Many people think that I have special Turo intel and access into Turo that other hosts don't have, but that simply isn't true. And while I do talk to a ton of Turo hosts, and I certainly would say that I have more access to Turo hosts than the average Turo host, I don't have any special information. So while I have been able to connect with a lot of hosts throughout the country, some impacted by this banning and some not, I don't have any special intel from Turo themselves. So I am basing all of my thoughts off of the same information that you guys have, which is that a lot of vehicles have been unlisted and it's been under the guise of maintenance concerns. Now, before we dive into what my exact assumptions surrounding this banning is, I first want to give a brief overview about the rating system within Turo, because a lot of seasoned hosts know this, but maybe some newer hosts don't. Now, whenever you're a Turo host, the guest can rate you an overall rating. This is what your profile rating is going to be. And if you look at your Turo ratings, this is going to be the first rating that you see. For example, whenever you see that a car has a 5-star rating, that is the overall rating for that specific vehicle. But Turo guests also have the ability to rate in specific categories as well. One of those categories is maintenance. So theoretically, it is possible for a vehicle to have a 5.0 overall rating, but have, say, a 4.7 or a 4.8 maintenance rating. While we have no way to confirm this because Turo hasn't confirmed it, the assumption with this delisting of vehicles throughout the country is that it impacted vehicles with specifically low maintenance ratings. But I'm going to be honest, based off of what I've learned over the last week, I don't think that this is the case. At least I don't think that maintenance is the major factor at play here. I think it is one of the factors. It is almost definitely not the only factor. The reason is that I have confirmed that there are many hosts throughout the country that have been impacted with having their vehicles banned despite the fact that they have strong maintenance ratings. And while I know that there is nuance to what is a good rating and what is a bad rating for Turo, I do think that we can all agree that 4.8 rating for maintenance certainly isn't bad. It's not perfect, but it's not bad. Now, there's also been discussions around of saying, hey, well, maybe the threshold is 4.8. If you have a maintenance rating of 4.8 or lower, you're going to get unlisted. Well, I also know hosts who have a 4.8 rating that weren't delisted. I also know hosts who have a lower than a 4.8 rating who weren't delisted either. There's also been a lot of speculation that it could be due to age or mileage. I've seen a ton of discussions that older vehicles are getting delisted, as are vehicles with higher mileage. And while this may be the case with some Turo hosts, it certainly isn't the case with all of them, because I know of many Turo hosts who have had newer, less mileage vehicles get unlisted, and I know of many other Turo hosts who have older, higher mileage cars who didn't have cars get unlisted. For example, it is no secret that my Turo fleet is full of older, higher mileage cars, and I wasn't impacted at all by this unlisting. I personally think that the mass bannings had a combination to do with market, cars, host metrics, vehicle metrics, maintenance, and profitability to Turo. I am absolutely convinced that there is no single factor at play here to determine which cars would stay on the platforms and which one would be banned. Now, past the assumptions, there is no doubt that Turo is making a conscious and active effort to ban cars that they deem don't belong on the Turo platform, whether that's bad cars or bad hosts. And truthfully, I think that many hosts, including myself, fully believe that this is a good thing. bad hosts do not belong on the Turo platform, and neither do bad cars. The major problem here, though, is the ambiguity that comes along with what is a bad car and what is a bad host, and how is Turo defining this and ultimately coming to the determination of which cars get unlisted. And many people, including myself, disagree with the way in which Turo's going about this and disagreeing with the metrics that they seem to be using in order to determine which cars they're getting rid of and which ones they're keeping. So at least in my opinion, the issue here isn't really the motion of going forward and putting your foot down to determine which cars belong on the Turo platforms and which ones don't. Bad cars on Turo, it hurts everyone, so it is in everyone's best interest to get rid of those bad vehicles and those bad hosts. But the glaring problem here, the thing that frustrates myself and many Turo hosts, is the fact that Turo did this so quickly with virtually no notice, and there is no clear understanding as to what caused certain cars to get unlisted and what allowed for others to stay. Because while Turo can claim that it is maintenance, I am again convinced that it wasn't the only factor. And we as hosts should also have a clear understanding of what we need to do in order to avoid this type of unlisting in the future. And this is something that, at least as of recording this video, Turo hasn't provided. I truly believe that if Turo would have come out with some sort of memo and said, hey, our vehicle requirements are changing, here's what you need to do moving forward, here's how you can prepare, and here's when these changes are going to go into effect, I don't think that people would be as up in arms as they are currently about this problem. But that isn't really what Turo did, and there's no doubt that they could have handled the situation much better. But the unfortunate reality is what's done is done. And now the question is, what are you going to do next? Now, I'm a big proponent that if you are in this situation and if you're able to, just simply sell the car. Cut your losses and go find a different vehicle and list that vehicle on Turo. But whenever you list that next vehicle, you need to make sure to do it in a real strategic way, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But before we dive into that, I want to touch on the fact that this instance and this scenario that we've come across in the last week of mass bannings on Turo, it is a textbook definition of why I preach the business model that I do on Turo and why I preach diversification. It's why I stress debt-free fleets and why I stress the fact that you should limit depreciation as much as possible. During this mass banning, there were many hosts that had been affected that had just recently purchased vehicles for Turo. There were people who had loans on vehicles that they needed Turo in order to pay off those loans, and there were a lot of people that were underwater on the cars that ended up getting banned. This puts these hosts in an incredibly tough spot. And the unfortunate thing is that spot is completely unavoidable depending on what route you go down with Turo. When I talk about diversification and playing the Turo game risk-free, I always use the hypothetical scenario of Turo could disappear tomorrow, and if that happens, what are you going to do? And while I think we can all agree that the chances of Turo disappearing tomorrow are basically none, but this situation that did end up playing out this last week is the type of concern that I have been concerned about for an extremely long time, and it is the key reason as to why I will never rely on Turo for 100% of my income. I think Turo is a great side hustle. I still fully believe that even after this mass bannings. I think that if you want to figure out a real, sustainable, scalable way to grow your wealth, Turo is an excellent path to go down, and it's something that I have done personally, and I've grown my wealth exponentially as a result. But no matter how much money I make on Turo, I will never, ever rely on it for 100% of my income. You don't want to put yourself in a position to where if your fleet gets banned or if a couple of your cars get banned, you're in a really tough spot. You want to be able to maintain flexibility, and the best way to do that is through diversification. Whenever I hear about hosts who only do Turo and they don't have any other side gigs or any other income streams, it makes me extremely nervous for them, and this scenario that just played out is exactly why. But now let's dive into what Turo hosts can do in order to navigate this relatively fuzzy landscape. Now, Turo claims that the mass banning is due to maintenance, so we all need to make sure that we're taking maintenance very, very seriously. Now, truthfully, this is something everybody should have already been taking seriously from the get-go, but now I would argue that this is even more important, and more important than the actual maintenance that you're doing is the documentation of doing it as well. I'm a big proponent of a paper trail. I like having a paper trail for anything, whether it's business activities, communication, or maintenance for my vehicles. My husband and I keep meticulous records on maintenance. Not only the maintenance that was done to the vehicles, but the receipts, when it was completed, what exactly was done, what maintenance is coming up next. This is extremely helpful to not only make sure that we stay on top of maintenance, but it's also good if there ever is a guest complaint about maintenance. We do have a guest complaint about maintenance, which absolutely does happen. It's unavoidable in this business. We typically do have a pretty intense paper trail showing what maintenance has been done to the vehicle. That way, if the guest does report a fraudulent claim, which can happen in the case of smoking claims, of cleaning fees, if a guest gets a late fee, they oftentimes will retaliate and say, hey, this vehicle wasn't maintained properly, it was unsafe. we can come back to Turo and say, actually, this isn't true, and here's the proof. This does work, and keeping a paper trail is incredibly important whenever it comes to maintenance, and it can help prevent negative reviews, especially negative maintenance reviews. On the same topic of maintenance, it's incredibly important to know about your vehicles that you have. Now, you don't have to be a mechanic, and you definitely don't have to work on your own cars, but you should know how to diagnose your cars, and you should understand and be able to point out whenever something isn't working properly. I don't work on my own cars personally. My husband does all of that. But if I'm driving one of our cars, I can absolutely listen and see what's going on and if something doesn't feel right. For example, just this week, I was driving one of our Mazda 2s, and I noticed that the suspension sounded abnormally loud, and it just didn't feel right. So I told my husband, hey, there's a noise coming from the front passenger side tire. I think you need to check it out. He checked it out, and then the sway bar end links needed to be replaced. If I wasn't paying attention to that, if I didn't know how to point that out, there's a good chance that that vehicle would have been rented to the next guest in that same condition, and the guest could have complained about it. These types of things are incredibly important to make sure that you're doing the preventative maintenance that needs to be done, and you're catching maintenance issues before a guest does. Another thing that's incredibly important is to maintain a good relationship with your guest. This is something that I've talked about in a lot of videos. I talked about it in recent videos even, but 5-star reviews on Turo are incredibly important. Not just 4 stars, but 5 stars. And a big part of 5-star reviews isn't just providing the guest with a great car, but it's really providing great customer service. Love it or hate it, Turo is a customer service-based business, and you have to be able to kiss some butts in order to get those 5-star reviews. So it's knowing how to communicate with your guests in a really personable way and really foster that relationship. But almost more importantly, it's about knowing how to navigate whenever things go wrong. Because if you're a Turo host, especially with a large fleet, things are going to go wrong. So knowing how to navigate that situation is absolutely crucial. And while I am definitely not a proponent that the guest is always right, in fact, I'm a firm believer that whoever came up with the phrase, the customer is always right, has never worked in customer service, the reality is you need to make the customer feel like they are right, or at least they're being heard. But truthfully, I think that this Turo mass banning brings one key part of my business model to light, and it's something that I talk about all the time. It's more important than maintenance, it's more important than customer reviews, and that is buying your cars at the right price and having the right Turo business model moving forward. Like I mentioned a few moments ago, this mass banning is a textbook reason as to why I think taking out debt for the sake of Turo is dangerous. I cannot stress enough how dangerous it is to grow a Turo fleet on the foundation of debt. Turo isn't Airbnb. It's oftentimes compared to Airbnb, and I think there are a ton of similarities here. But the difference with Airbnb is that Airbnb revolves around an appreciating asset. If you buy an Airbnb property and you rent that out for a year and then you decide that Airbnb isn't for you, chances are you're going to be able to sell that car and at least break even, but you may even be able to make some money. While this is definitely possible with Turo, in fact, it is my entire business model, the majority of new Turo hosts don't go about doing this. They go and buy a newer car that's a depreciating asset, and if they decide that they don't want to do Turo after a year, they're going to lose tens of thousands of dollars in depreciation alone. This is why buying cars that are heavily depreciated, buying them debt-free, and buying them below market value is so incredibly important. As a Turo host, you need to be extremely mindful about the debt that you take on, and you need to make sure that any debt you do take on can be paid with or without Turo. You need to be extremely mindful about what the depreciation of the cars that you're buying looks like. Because depreciating asset within Turo, it's not a given. You don't have to accept the fact that a car is going to depreciate while running a Turo fleet. There is a way to buy a car at the right price to where you can either limit depreciation or in some cases completely get rid of it. And while doing this is easiest with older cars like the ones that I rent, it isn't impossible to do with newer cars either. With my business model that I talk about, you can own cars for free and you can easily offload them if something was to go wrong. And this is why buying cars at the right price in the right way and with debt in mind, it is so incredibly important. But last but not least is having a plan B. What are you going to do if one day Turo kicks you off the platform? And again, the idea of Turo kicking you off, I think that this is fairly unlikely. I've been a Turo host for 7 years and I have never even received anything close to a warning of getting kicked off. While I know some hosts have, this is extremely uncommon, and as long as you follow the terms of service, you are for the most part going to be safe. But on a platform that you don't control, nothing is ever guaranteed, and Turo definitely falls into this category. While it is unlikely that they'll kick you off the platform, it isn't guaranteed either. So what is your plan B if Turo was to ever kick you off, or if they were to ever unlist some of your cars? Would it be get around, direct rentals, maybe just selling your cars and going into a new business entirely? Obviously, this is very dependent on you and your situation, but knowing roughly roughly what you would do in the case of a worst case scenario, I think it's very important. I'm a big believer in the phrase, prep for the worst, hope for the best, and you should have a plan B, at least in the back of your mind. That way you know what to do if something does go wrong. Now, I'm genuinely sorry for any Turo hosts that had their vehicle unlisted over the last week, and if there is anything that I can do to help or any type of advice that I can give, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. My handle is @aubrey.janik. While I don't respond every single day, I do try to get to the messages, so it might take a bit for me to get to you, but I will get to you. At the end of the day, this is a crappy situation, and it's something that many people, including myself, are very, very frustrated with. But it is absolutely a cautionary tale of why buying a car for Turo and listing it isn't as easy as it seems, and there definitely is a strategy to going about doing this correctly and protecting yourself in the process. And that's why buying cars at a discount and buying the right cars is incredibly important. But like always, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it, so make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.